Hello, everyone who's attending. My name is Mark Caruso. I'm the Vice President of the Los Angeles chapter of the AIMP, and I welcome you to this week's continuation of our summer educational webinar series. I hope you've been enjoying our series programming so far this summer, or whatever we call summer these days. Today's installment is sponsored by Sound Royalties and is a very topical subject, managing financial opportunities during the pandemic. Who would have thought that would have been the topic this year? Not I. I would have lost that bet, but here we are. We also hope that you will attend next week's educational series finale, Maximizing Lyric Revenue, and continue to attend our webinars in September as we get back to our online programming from all of our chapters. But before we begin today's panel, we would like to thank City National Bank for their generous and continued support of the AIMP. And now, without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Alex Heike, CEO and founder of Sound Royalties. And Alex, the virtual stage is yours.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that. And I'd like to thank Heather and Andrew for joining me in this discussion. You know, when we came up with the concept, and they were the first two literally that I thought of. You know, Heather Beverly brings to the conversation over 20 years of law practice representing a variety of clientele, which include screenplay writers and some of the industries, obviously chart-topping, urban, R&B, gospel, award-winning songwriters, artists, producers, entertainers, and the list goes on. I think you even see Tyga plaque behind her head there, and some others. So I'm really excited that Heather is joining us today. And Heather and I have known each other for a little bit and worked together on different projects, and always a pleasure. And then Andrew Kintz, he brings a very deep history of over 20 years of banking experience, and he was actually recruited by First Horizon in 2016 to launch a division dedicated to serving the music industry's unique needs. And this is after having served the industry for a long time. First Horizon's music group, if you're not aware of it, provides obviously the specialized financing services to music industry companies and individuals, whether you're a publisher, a label, management firm, agency, production companies, music rights organizations, and then the artists, songwriters, and producers, both just not locally in Nashville, but also nationally. And I don't even think he's in Nashville right now. He's touring the country. A fun story about Andrew is when I decided that I wanted to come to the music industry and be part of the music industry, the first thing I did was I visited every single financial institution, both public and private, that I could, to talk to them and see what was happening and what could I add to the mix. And Andrew, honest to God, I was nobody in this industry, and nobody had heard of me, nothing. You know, he opened his door, was very welcoming. We even had a beer together. Cheers, Andrew. And you know, he really was very welcoming, and one of the first faces that I got to know. And this was before Sound Royalties, interestingly enough. So thanks, Andrew, as well. Mm-hmm. So today, you know, as you know, we'll be talking about the evolution of music and thereby music financing, with a focus on royalties and music catalogs, because I think we bring a lot of knowledge and expertise on that, as well as what creatives can be doing during these times to remain successful and generate income. You know, let's dive right into it. So first, let's talk about how streaming has changed creatives' incomes over the past few years. You know, I'll start by saying, you know, streaming has grown into a very important part of every creative's income stream. Up until recently, we were still seeing creatives that weren't collecting their digital performance royalties, something that simple, because it didn't account for much for them. But today, streaming royalties are over 80% of the total industry revenue, and creatives can no longer kind of overlook this piece of income. You know, Heather or Andrew, I don't know who wants to start, but what are you guys seeing in terms of the impact of streaming in the industry?
I'd love to jump in, and just something I've noticed, if you don't mind me jumping right in. Please. We have seen, as a music banker, you know, we take both the music master recording as collateral, as well as the music publishing asset, the lyric melody. And 10 years ago, we did not take the master as collateral, as a collateral bank. It's not just my bank. And so what's happened in music industry banking is we like the music master as collateral now because of streaming. And so that's something that basically opened up an entire new market for us, because now we want diversified catalogs of both copyrights. And that changed a whole lot for us and actually made our banking businesses grow. When I say our, I'm speaking for the 5 or 6 banks that have dedicated divisions to music.
When you and I talked 7 or 8 years ago, it was PRO advances. That was the core of the business.
Yeah, we love performance royalties. We love putting copyright mortgages on the publishing asset, but we weren't looking at the master, because basically, you know, the record business was just on this nosedive from 2000 until 2014, 15, and then streaming just turned it. I mean, it was great.
But it's been an evolution. I mean, it really has gone through the industry, and the financial aspect of it has gone through so many changes over the last couple of decades, not to date myself or anyone else here. But, you know, when I started my practice, you know, and we were in the 90s and early 2000s, and that's when people were selling physical product out of their trunks. There was, you know, still retail sales in stores. There were things called record stores. Best Buy wasn't just TVs and electronics. It actually had a music section. So did Target, all of that. And, you know, it was actually a really good era for music. And that was when a lot of some of the sponsorships and endorsements and other things became more commonplace. And there were so many more revenue streams for artists to sort of grow into. And then, yeah, we came into this sort of what just happened. No more cassettes, CDs, no more CDs. Now we're downloading, or maybe we're not. And we're in a Napster era. We're in a bootlegging or a find a free way to get music era. And the industry panicked. And at that time, you know, everyone just thought it's over. I mean, just what are we going to do? Music's going to be free. No one's ever going to make money off of it. Where are these new monetization and revenue models going to come from? And you're right. One of you said streaming happened. And all of a sudden, I think it took a minute, as anything does, because obviously the business has to catch up with the technology. But now it's like this virtual happy dance going on in the industry and in most genres. Now, I should say there are some genres, you know, Alex, you mentioned that I do a lot of work in the gospel music industry. And they've been sort of one of the final entrants to the world of streaming. I mean, you've got a business model that had venues to perform in weekly, every Sunday. You could bring physical product in and sell it. And there was enough of a demographic that still utilized that technology that it wasn't a big deal. But they've been hit, and they're still hit pretty hard financially, but they're coming into the streaming age and getting the genre and its consumers to understand the import of it. But the rest of the world, I mean, we're back to multi-platinum records. We're back to producers seeing royalties and things like that that we just didn't see for a long time.
Yeah, and it's interesting. A lot of them didn't expect the different pockets of royalties to account for much. They dismissed them. But there are different royalty streams, and I know Andrew works with them. You know, when we started Sound Royalties, it was PRO advances, then grew into publishing, then grew into, you know, the distribution and label, and, you know, even looked at touring. Thankfully, we weren't too heavily into it when March happened. Who would have thought? But yeah, it's a much wider realm than it ever was. And then when you look at the genres, the breakup of the different genres, R&B was first. Contemporary R&B was the first to start streaming. It was the kids that were using it on their phone. You know, they wanted it on their phone and understood how to do it. And I'll never forget, I visited with Amazon, and they showed me their charts, and they said, look, this is the Billboard Hot 100 chart. 8 out of the top 10 are contemporary R&B songs. 2 pop, 0 country, 0 Christian. And then they pulled up the Amazon Alexa. I think I have one around here somewhere. And they said, look at the charts for this. And there was zero contemporary R&B in the charts for them in the top 10. And the reason being, it's who's the demographic. And if you go to middle America, they're asking for different, they want Christian rap, Christian heavy metal, Christian rock, whatever it may be, but they're able to ask for, and they're asking for things they couldn't get before. And so those genres are really even a few years behind some of the rest of the industry and that we're used to working with.
Yeah.
You know, so, so let's get into the even deeper part of it. How have royalties and artists' incomes changed this year with the pandemic?
Whoa. What? Oh my gosh. It's been fascinating. I mean, just to see what has happened. You know, I found that, you know, this basically picture a lot of people trapped in their houses. And they're, you know, now they're able to listen to more music because they couldn't before in their office or the cubicle or wherever they were working before, if they were able to maintain their work. And so you're seeing a whole lot of actually the older music, what I would call like more catalog music, doing really well because people are listening to what they know and listening to what they like. And so they're streaming that, whether through Alexa or just having Spotify through Bluetooth or however they're consuming music. And you've seen that. I have seen a little bit of a struggle for the artists that are making a new release during COVID. I mean, you've got the Uber fan that's on top of it, but it's just a little bit harder for just getting outside of the Uber fan for that music to be accessed. But as far as the stuff that, you know, that is older and that people are just kind of have always listened to, you know, that stuff's doing really well and seeing an uptick. And it's almost offsetting basically the lack of on the performance side of you know, really all the restaurants and malls and airports and bars being closed from the general licensing side. So it's really interesting what's happening with the cash flows, you know, to an artist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm finding that, you know, obviously we could talk all day about things that are down, which is obvious. And, but I kind of try to stay the eternal optimist. Plus, you know, my clients are looking for answers and ways to still, you know, make a living, not only today, but even projecting forward. And so I'm really finding that, number one, I love the fact that people are getting creative now. You know, people setting up their home studios and doing, you know, their Facebook lives or their IG lives or their, you know, some sort of streaming something or another performances. I'm seeing people going and figuring out how to still participate in things like these drive-in concerts and these pop-up sort of venue events. I've got a client that did one of the biggest concert. It was a festival, 3-day, 4-day festival in Chicago, with some of the biggest names in multiple genres. And they did a 4-day drive-in virtual, well, not virtual, it was, you know, in-person music festival, which was amazing to see. At the same time, I think that people are really starting to, which I also think is a positive, figure out where do their revenues come from, especially if it was artists who really focused on touring or performance. You know, people are in the studio now, they're creating, they're looking to make sure that they've got something ready for the next or something to release. They're starting to understand the marketing and the social media and the power of what they can do in communicating directly with their fan bases to engage. They're increasing their merchandising lines. They're calling us to see, you know, what kind of income streams are there that I don't know about that maybe I should. And so they're looking at their performance royalties. They're looking at, wait, have I not gotten any statements or accountings or payments from my label, from my publisher, from, you know, my PRO, from wherever. And so they're getting more exploratory, more inquisitive, which I think is a great benefit because I think that creatives are learning a lot right now. But I will say this, what I don't know that I expected, that's happened a lot in my practice in the last 90 to 120 days, is a huge growth in licensing. My film and TV business is growing, film development, television development, which is people anticipating that there's going to be a need for content since so many productions stopped. Major, big productions, lots of people, big, 50,000 people on site doing a gladiator scene somewhere. That's just not in production right now. And so now that new content is being created for television, for film, such as also the need for licensing the music for those particular productions. And so I'm seeing a lot more licensing coming in the door, which I also think is a beautiful thing. And so there's still a music industry happening. I've got clients that, have during the pandemic have actually gone viral. I represent a little kid whose mom wrote a song called I Just Want to Live. And that song got posted by everybody from LeBron James to our past President Obama and a million people in between. And this kid ended up in 14 days having a production deal, a record deal, a new agent, a record out, a remix out, opening the NASCAR season, all kinds of things. So I think there's opportunities, music is the soundtrack of our lives for a reason. And there's a lot going on for our creatives to be talking about. And so a lot of them are being creative and they're doing what they do best and figuring out how to maybe be a voice for people during this time. And so I believe there's hope. I believe you can make, lemonade out of lemons.
There is, we talk about unprecedented times and they are, but at the same time, things are always changing and things are always evolving. It's just much faster than ever before right now. I mean, the 800-pound gorilla in the room is that 55% of global music recorded industry, the income was touring live. And up until March, it was going to grow from 10 billion in 2018 to 31 billion by 2022. With that all but disappearing, everybody's forced to look at other things. And there are, as you point out, Heather, rightfully so, there are so many other areas where there are pockets of revenue that people didn't look to before, understand how to capitalize. We even put out a guide, 50 income streams. And it started out, hey, can we put together 15 income streams that everybody should know about, or 6? And then it was 20, and then it was 21. And I was driving the team crazy because we kept adding to it. It's on the website, basically 50 income streams every creative should know about and where to find them with little hyperlinks. That's insane that we're in an industry where it's not, this is where I get my check, that there's literally 50 different income streams. Do I qualify for this? Oh yeah, where do I go get it? Do I qualify? And who can keep track of all that? And some of the major artists, weren't collecting certain ones because it didn't matter. Touring was so big. It was, right. They were just the scraps that we didn't have the time for. But now they're like, oh, those aren't scraps. They've added up. So
Alex, I got 3 things along that. They're right in line. So one, all these artists that are now, this income stream that they were depending on is not there. They are coming to you. They're coming to Heather. They're coming to me. What is my music really worth? How do I tap into it? And they're finding ways. And we're literally talking about the small independent artists up to A+ level artists coming to finance companies, to music banks, coming to their attorneys saying, what do I do? Oh my gosh, what is this really worth? And all of a sudden, we're having a whole lot more conversations than we have ever had, honestly, because touring got shut off. So there's a piece of it where all of a sudden there's a need for providing some financial advice and some help for the right connections to the right people on helping folks sometimes just get some capital to get through, just basically to bridge them until next year when, God willing, touring's back. The other piece is this crazy creativity that Heather just mentioned. I'll throw out a shout out to this country artist named Jimmy Allen. Jimmy Allen got his tour totally canceled. He was opening for a lot of folks. He had a couple things he was headlining, and he went and created this album with all these A+ listers from Nelly to Tim McGraw. He basically was like, let's go make some real music, and let me start collaborating with these other people that are here in Nashville. And I mean, now that album is actually doing really well for that release during COVID. So, you know, I've been really impressed with that. And the final thing I've noticed is the independent artist doesn't have a label deal. I have another friend, independent artist in Nashville. He decided to do a backyard tour, and he's a guy that's going to gross like 200 grand on his backyard tour. It's just him and a guitar, literally showing up in a van, and everybody signing waivers about COVID. And he's going to net more doing that than when he was playing all the clubs all over the Southeast, essentially. And he's a pop artist. And it's like, that's creative. There people are finding ways, you know, to pivot, to change, to figure out, okay, this thing I depended on is gone. I've got to find some other way to make this work. And they're so creative that they do. And it's actually just fun to be along for the ride with a lot of them, because I'm amazed at what they've been able to think of, you know, to kind of pivot and change.
Yeah, I love being part of the ride. And actually, I believe I was with Nelly at my place in Nashville many months ago when they were putting that down.
Oh, with Jimmy Allen, that song's a great song. That was a great song.
But more importantly, what you touched on, and I think Heather will keen on too, most of the clients that come through our door are either saying, hey, what is this worth, or what can you do? Mm-hmm. And more often than not, the first conversation is no. Before we look at that, you're not collecting this. Where's this? Where's this? And we're showing them mm-hmm. all the stuff that they're not collecting. There's so much that's being missed. Or they're saying, hey, someone offered me, you know, 15 million bucks on this. And, you know, that's a 15 multiple because it's earning. And I'm like, yes, but if you're really not collecting this, this, and this, so it's right. Really about 3 million a year. So you're getting a 5 multiple, right? And those numbers can be 50,000 and 25,000 instead of millions. But you know, it's understanding what people, they don't typically get it. I'm sure that's a big part of your job, right, Heather, in terms of ensuring they're getting everything?
Absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of deals to be done. I was just talking about licensing, but there's a lot of people really exploring how they can maybe leverage their existing catalogs, their masters or their music publishing catalogs, and really trying to figure out how do they value it, how do they quantify, how do they decide whether or not it's worth something, if anything, and if so, what, and you know, not even just for if they're looking for advances or to sell, but even in deals that we're doing. I mean, again, I feel so grateful and blessed to be a part of an industry that is flourishing during a time that so many people are struggling so badly. And, you know, people can't find work, yet we are up to here and beyond with work because it's an industry that doesn't stop. But for a lot of our people who are struggling with how do we keep the revenues going, we've got to do these analysis. But I've even been doing a lot of publishing deals lately, and where I'm like, look, now's the time. We've got to get a list. Where's your discography? Where's the list of your catalog? What splits do you have on these songs? Like, we can't have even a company do any kind of valuation on what your things are worth until we get the information together. And it's amazing to me how so many people don't have it in one place. They'll maybe go to their PRO and see what they've got registered, realize haven't registered a ton of their titles, or Sound Exchange or wherever. And so they're aggregating the information so that we can help them navigate through what their options might be.
Got it. One of the things that we often are asked, and I'm sure is going to be a question, and so let's kill it before we get to the Q&A, is how has the pandemic directly impacted royalty streams? You know, I can say from our perspective, based on the thousands of deals and data points that we see on a daily basis, you know, the leading indicators initially show that performance income is down approximately 8 to 30% in the second quarter compared to previous quarters. And I know that's a big range, but there's more to it, and the reason for that range. The largest disparity that we're observing is if you carve out domestically compared to internationally. You know, domestically, we saw royalties decline single digits, upper single digits in the second quarter compared to previous quarters. But internationally, and that's where it gets interesting, we've seen a decline from 20 to 40%, leaving us to feel that the COVID impact on the international performance income is really so far is about 30%, which is significant.
Mm-hmm.
You know, are you guys seeing a downturn in the royalty checks and as well, or?
But it's all relative. I mean, yeah, yes, to answer your question, and ours are, 10% down plus or minus 2 or 3, depending on the catalog and the artists that we're talking about so far from our perspective. And when we look at that, it's relatively such a small drop, given things that are happening kind of across the board. You look at other, when you look at music as an asset class, think of it as a publisher, you're owning this asset, what's happening in this asset class. So many other asset classes are really hurting, or else have so much uncertainty into the future that people are getting away from that asset class. We're finding that people, even with the 10% drop, want this asset, and they are doing everything they can to get a hold of this asset. We might end up getting into this later, but I mean, I'm a banker. I mean, that is because of interest rates. Interest rates are in the tank. And they're going to be in the tank for a long, long time. And so people, whether the publisher that owns it now want yield, and those assets are still having great yield, even if it was going from, $10 for, every 100 invested, you got your 10% yield. If it drops to $9 now, you got a 10% drop there. That 9% yield is still fantastic. And people want that kind of steady yield. And so we're seeing crazy amounts of money flooding in to partner with the folks on this call that run independent music publishers to come in and buy the independent music publisher. And we're seeing plenty of artists saying, what do I do here? I mean, there's just all this money chasing my assets. What do I do? And so it's really interesting times. And so yes, we're down 10%, and that stinks. And I'm wish that we were up 10%. But at the end of the day, it's all relative. And this is still a very well-performing asset class. I talked to a guy who just formed his independent music publishing company this year in 2020. He's not worried at all. He's LA. I should introduce you, Heather, to him. But he's an LA-based publisher, and it's like he's fine. He's great. He's great. He's got great relationships in the industry, and his new pub company is going to crush it. I promise they will. But I mean, anyway, it's all relative. Yes, it's down a little bit, but it's not really causing we as music bankers a lot of concern when it's our collateral, because there's still so many assets chasing. I mean, so much money chasing it that we know that actually the value of the asset is increasing.
Yeah, and that's, one of the things is, what are some of the factors that are impacting the catalog multiples? And one, with interest rates so low, people want a place to put money. And so there's a lot of investors coming in the market. So that's driving the numbers up. But I will say that we saw over the past few years, in 2014, a 6 multiple is great. Then it went to a 10 multiple. And then last year, towards the end, I was seeing 23 multiples on certain assets. You got to talk, are you talking publishing, what type of copyrights, that type of stuff. But there is the other issue of people that will put a non-binding letter of intent out there and then go search for the money. And so they'll bid higher and higher and higher. But those
and lock up the publishing company or the catalog, so they can't really look around. Yeah.
But so when COVID happened, we saw some of those deals fall through, and when we went back to the market, we saw the multiples come back a little bit. We're seeing multiples are still excellent. They're very, very high, but they're coming down a little bit from where they were just, if you go from February to now.
Yeah, and also with regard to your question, Alex, about kind of where the royalties going. I mean, I do think that there's going to be some things that we're really not going to see the real impact until, 2021 and even into 2022, where this downturn that happened in March, April, May, really kind of this middle half of the year here in 2020, that's going to show up on people's, accounting statements next year. And some of those payouts are going to be down. But I think really what the point is, and to Andrew's point about, people are still in this business. This business isn't going anywhere. And so, and it's a long-term game. I mean, especially when you're talking about music publishing. I mean, it's a long-term game. It will appreciate over time. Yes, the fact that streaming was affected and down and advertisers were pulling out, and even terrestrial radio. I mean, I've got radio personality clients, and, people have had to adjust because the advertising dollars haven't been there. And that's what makes the whole world go round, right? Yep. But that is why it's that much more important. And I love, Alex, that Sound Royalties has that 50 ways to income, because it's true. There's other ways to do it. So, we didn't always have streaming. We didn't always have certain things, but newer things are entering the market in terms of opportunities for revenue. And the more that I think creatives are looking at the totality of their brand and looking at the different ways that there are to make money that aren't just reliant on external factors like, what are the advertisers going to do? Or, what are the consumers en masse going to do? Because you'd be so surprised on some of these artists and writers who have, call them cult followings, people nobody's heard of, but they've got a steady base of people they can connect with. Those people will still support them. And those are the types of things folks got to kind of tap into.
Yeah. Are you guys seeing creatives more interest or less, or an uptick in creatives advancing against or interested in advancing against their royalties or even selling them?
Absolutely.
More leverage. Go ahead, Heather. Go ahead. Heather.
I was just going to say, I mean, first of all, it's amazing. A lot of people didn't know that was a thing, right? I mean, not everyone knows that's a thing. And so it's kind of incumbent upon, management, attorneys, other folks to kind of educate them that it's a thing. But I would also say that once, there have been some pretty high profile people who have either advanced against their catalogs and advertised it or made it public, or they've sold it and it's made news, that I've gotten people inquiring, like, what is that? What's that about? And being far more interested in it. And some out of just pure necessity and desperation, some out of kind of financial planning and, really just kind of looking at the value of their assets as they would if they, were investing in real property or, other things. So I definitely have seen an increase in interest of knowing what it is, or for people who know what it is, an actual interest in stepping in and sort of finding out how it could be something that is helpful to them.
Yeah. You say the same.
I've seen both independent publishers and artists that have some of their own publishing. I've seen them in general, huge generalization here, but in general not want to sell because they love what they've created, or if they're going to sell, it's only going to be a piece. They're not going to sell out, And
which is good.
From the independent publisher side, I've seen some folks come to me and say, why don't we do what we call a dividend recap, which is basically like, hey, you've got these funds and everything courting the independent music publisher, but the music publisher is saying, you know what? I got another 20 years of this and I love it and I want to keep doing it. However, I also see an opportunity for me to take some chips off the table and do something else with them. And so they'll come to the bank and say, hey, can we do a dividend recap? And I'll say, and what that essentially means is, hey, we will take all your assets as collateral, your songs as collateral. We will, give you 30 or 40% of that valuation. And you can actually take that as a dividend and kind of take some chips off the table, but you didn't have to sell. Puts a little bit of leverage on the catalog, but not bad leverage, just a little bit of leverage on the catalog. Then all of a sudden that they can keep operating. And as Heather just said, it's like financial planning. They then can take that money and go invest it and diversify it into other assets that aren't music, because they have such a huge concentration in music because they own the independent music publishing company. And so, I mean, it's music all the time. So they might need to go get an investment portfolio or own some real estate or go buy something else with some chips that they take off the table. But they're not selling. They're just they're just putting a little leverage on.
For a period of time, or?
Yeah, oh yeah, totally. I mean, it's a period of time that ends up being paid back from the cash flow streams of the catalog. And so, yeah, it's basically exactly.
But it's not 100% recoupment, right? So
No. Well, I mean, every deal's different, but yeah, it's generally like it's just got a set principal and interest payment, and all the money goes. They're collecting everything off the catalog, and then they just pay us our little principal and interest payment, keep all the rest for themselves.
Which is very similar to the transactions that we're doing, whether it's for independent publishers or writers. It's in the sense of it's a specific dollar amount for a specific period of time. We'll go out many years. I mean, we'll go out 5 years, and it still keeps their income flowing, right? And that's the key.
You don't have to give it up. I mean, some people want to own whether the publisher or the artist. They want to own these things, and pass it on to their children. I mean, that's important, and I find that all three of us here can help our clients, our music clients, do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know creatives that are earning. I'm thinking one right now that's earning from one song he wrote in the 80s is still a majority, if not all, of his livelihood today. But once you sell it, it's gone.
Right.
Absolutely. Heather, how do you tell creatives and their teams, or how do you advise creatives in terms of understanding the value of their catalogs and in terms of getting a good deal?
Well, circumstantially, obviously it varies, but
yeah.
As I was saying earlier, the first thing is really taking a good look at what is there.
Yeah.
What do you have that's available to leverage at all? What percentages of what you have is yours, right? If we're talking about compositions, I mean, and then also what kind of results have your catalog had over time? In the short-term immediate, in the long-term. I've got people who have very young catalogs, and, they might think that because it's so young, it doesn't have much value, but then they've been big records. They've done really well. They've been significant and have the potential. With streaming, the beauty of it is that the life cycle of these records now is just so much longer, because the catalog business has just become a business again in ways that, who could imagine? So we're looking at, first of all, what do you have, and taking a very realistic look at what there is to offer. And then I'm telling them about things like, obviously the deals are varying. Like you said, these multiples vary depending on who's interested. I mean, I've seen, multiples as conservative as 5 to 8. And then I've seen these like, what are we doing? We're at a 20 times multiple in some instances. And so it's not even, yes, what do you have is important, but who's looking for what you have is monumentally important as well, because different investors are motivated by different things. I mean, there's some foreign companies that are, they are just grabbing and, grabbing and going and trying to make things look very attractive. But again, here we go. Good deal, bad deal, depends on the client, first of all. I tend to agree with the two of you that if you can avoid a sale outright prematurely, then please do so. I also understand, I've had a couple of clients with some circumstances where sale was really the only option given the type of multiple that they needed for whatever crises they were dealing with. Yeah. But we are always looking for that combination of things that maximizes the value of the assets that they have, minimizes the give, the sacrifice. If we can avoid the full sale, trying to avoid that. If we can, maximize the multiple we're getting, that if we can preserve certain parts of the revenue streams or certain other revenue streams, so that perhaps on the master side, you can still, do your thing and keep your revenues, but maybe it's on the publishing side that we're looking at some things, or maybe it's just a percentage. So, putting together a good deal or advising a client as to what a good deal is it's just not cookie cutter in its approach, because it has to take into account individually what is the goal, what are they trying to do, and then having a very realistic eye on what do you actually have. It's not a subjective eye. It's just, what are the facts? I'm not saying your songs are great or terrible. It's not for me to say.
What are the numbers? What are the numbers?
But it's personal. I mean, I always give my clients the analogy to real property, homes. You know, people want to put their house on the market and they just think that their pool is amazing, or they think that the way that they did the decor in the kitchen is everything. It's like, I know you love it. I know you think it's the best house there ever was. I know you think it should sell for the most ever, but there's some factors in the marketplace that are just going to limit you no matter how much you're tied emotionally to this property. And the same holds true for catalog, songs, content, and things like that.
And you know, to that point, I think deals have changed, you know, through the years. There's the ability to retain some of the ownership. You know, and there's the ability from a sales perspective, there's an ability to retain the ownership, which wasn't there in the past, and there's an interest in that. And from a finance perspective, you know, we've seen through the years the ability now to retain the income stream. You're not giving up the income stream and not seeing a penny until you recoup, which enables them. You know, in terms of a bad deal, one of the things that it haunts me, I still think about, is a major artist that I was looking at. He had sold his publishing and was trying to buy it back. And there was a buyback clause, which was great. But as I read through the deal, it was the simplest thing. It basically said in there, include all neighboring rights. Well, his multiple looked great until you factored in it was global neighboring rights. And he had never collected a penny on that. Well, obviously the entity that bought it did. You know, and so just a little sentence in there can just change everything. Andrew, what do you think some of the smartest things you're seeing creatives do during the pandemic financially?
I think they're asking for advice from folks who understand the business, understand cash flow. I mean, what you just said about, you know, finding the 50 income streams that are potential for an artist. I mean, I think a lot of folks are maybe because there's less froth, there's just not tons of money coming around. It's like, I want to actually understand it better. I think the best publishers represented here on this call as part of AIMP, you know, those publishers that can deliver real value to their writers are those that can both not only enhance the value of the copyrights that both are sharing and the income streams from, but they can also, you know, explain the way that it's working. So, I mean, there's kind of an educational process going on. I think that's probably the best thing that I'm seeing happening, and I'm loving the way that both publishers, but also really their songwriters are having a chance to understand the way this industry really works. Because oftentimes, you know, there's been this division of, you're a creative, you write songs, just write songs. I'll arrange co-writes for you, and we'll work on this business side. Now it almost is like, okay, let's actually explain what the publisher is doing and what their role really is, and all that they're doing to actually enhance the value of that music that great songwriters creating.
Yeah. Are, in terms of, since we're talking to publishers here, you know, are you seeing an uptick in publishers that are just looking at, because I know we are, in terms of publishers looking to acquire assets and want to leverage the assets that they're acquiring, or the deals that the way you're structuring them?
Do you want to start, Heather?
The answer is yes.
Yeah.
I'm actually really impressed right now with the number of people who kind of, I think you mentioned, Andrew, you had a young kid kind of started their own publishing company, and they're, you know, kind of doing well. I've got some people as well who are really getting in the game, and they're acquiring, establishing their companies. They're looking to acquire assets. I'm also on calls constantly with publishers, label owners who are like, what you got? What you got?
Yeah.
You got anything for me? Any catalogs? I'm like, I didn't know I was catalog salesman. But it definitely is something that more people are looking into because they see it as the, like I said, the long-term beneficial investment game that it can be. I mean, and I just don't see that it would slow down, even though we're always going to have fluctuations in the economy and in this kind of the state of the union, so to speak. But there is a certain constant in this industry, which is that as long as the technology keeps growing and expanding, as long as there are more outlets for content, I mean, every time I see another, oh, now it's Disney Plus and it's, this and that streaming such and so, blah, blah, blah. And Facebook is now doing programming. And I mean, it's just people creating the content creates the avenue for music, for writers, for content creators to have more places for the music to be monetized. And so I just don't see that there's a slowdown in that, and add to it that it's becoming more and more accessible every single day for an individual to exploit their music, find a company that will assist with monetization. Those percentages are going down. So the rights owners and the copyright owners are keeping even a larger share of the income. It's a model that's gonna continue to grow. And so that's why it's got investors and people who are curious about it, the investing. They're definitely, that pool of people is growing.
Let's before we run out of time, let's hit some of these questions. One is, earnout clauses are also an important part to give sellers some security if the catalog performs well for a buyer. Do you have any purview on earnout clauses and how they've crept up more and more in deals that we're seeing? So I'll lead off, so not to catch you guys off guard. What we're seeing is, the standard has been, it's 10% per year. If it grows 10% by year, you get this dollar amount. But we're also starting to see more easier to attain earnout clauses in the sense of, if within 3 years it overperforms by this multiple by just this amount at any given time, they're important to include. Are you guys is that part of the conversation in your deals?
I mean, it depends on the size. For me, it depends on the size. When we're talking about institutional dollars, basically the funds that are coming in to purchase publishing assets and maybe partner with a publisher, or else they are a bona fide publisher themselves, but they're essentially backed by institutional dollars. You sort of have the MBAs in the room that are creating these contracts, which definitely have earnout clauses with carrots and sticks in them on both sides, where it's like, this stuff better perform, and they're putting in a lot of contractual clauses in the earnout, which is trying to make sure that the investment being made is going to perform to expectations. And a lot of times that's to the pension fund or the big institutional investors' expectations. So that's where you've just got almost too many people crafting the deal, too many lawyers, very expensive transactions. On the smaller things, that was not a knock at Heather at all. I'm talking about, but on the smaller deals, I'm finding that there's actually there's really generous earnout clauses, because down in that market, they want to make sure that seller feels like they're going into a great partnership with that buyer.
Yeah. And we do. I mean, it especially in some of the smaller deals, but for significant things to that seller, because we still don't know exactly where it's going. I think everybody's optimistic, but there's a lot of sellers who are hesitant because they don't want to do it prematurely, and they don't want to miss out on what, they don't want to have that, woulda, coulda, shoulda type of moment. And so, there's sometimes some pretty aggressive structures that are put in for, a seller to still participate later in overperformance or, beyond the goals that were originally set. And so it makes it more amenable for that seller to kind of even get in the deal. But it's definitely a part of the discussion.
Interesting question. How has underwriting in deals changed as a result of the pandemic?
Oh God, no! Don't ask. I mean, it's harder. It's not harder because of the music industry. It's harder because the banking industry. So I feel like I don't know which one I'm more in, the music industry or the banking industry. But the banking industry has this what I would call the COVID overlay. And this isn't First Horizon Bank. This is me and the 5 other banks that are in this business in a big way. And all of us talk about the COVID overlay that we're dealing with. And what that basically means is there are more people that are looking at the music industry transaction and deciding about its risks and how it should be priced and all of that. There are just more people in the room, which makes it take a little bit longer right now to get our deals done, as well as I found that actually, even with the overall drop in interest rates, our deals are still have pretty strong rates. In other words, they're not super high, but a lot of them are on floating rates of whatever, LIBOR 350 or something, so people can still get a low rate. But there's a COVID overlay. Underwriting there's more scrutiny in general, and that would be for anyone going to any bank for any reason, but it does affect us in the music industry, just to be honest.
Well, and I'll be honest too, I think I've actually had a couple conversations with underwriters, like, so if the client got a COVID relief loan, what's that going to do? And they're like,
oh yeah,
we don't know. We haven't seen it yet. Or there's these things that are happening, where we're like, people are, of course, receiving whatever kind of support and aid and, that they need and can get, or thinking that they've got, certain things under control that wouldn't be an issue in underwriting, that all of a sudden it's like, it might, we're not sure. Yeah. And we're kind of walking into some of this stuff really blind, not knowing how it's going to shake out. And I think some of us on this side are just as nervous and curious what's going to happen as some of the people on the inside at the banks and doing the underwriting. Like, we're not going to handle that yet. Let us know.
The conversation that keeps happening is, for folks that are not in the music industry, they all of a sudden think because the live music industry is temporarily dead, that it will come back to life, and it will be great, by the way. But just because it's not doing very well, they're all of a sudden saying, oh gosh, the whole music industry must be on the ropes. And the truth of the matter is not at all. I mean, the everything that is basically label, publisher, songwriter, copyright is actually performing really well and is not recession proof, but is not getting hit like a lot of other asset classes in this recession that we're in. And so I just keep having to educate people, sometimes internally, to say, hey guys, our industry, the music industry, is actually pretty healthy right now. We have one little section of it that's not so healthy, and it will come back and be healthy again. It's been around really for thousands of years, and so it will be back. But at the end of the day, there's like a lot of people will paint us with a broad brushstroke, and you got to realize, hey, we're actually a healthy industry, especially in public.
Absolutely. And from our perspective, from an underwriting perspective, like we talked about earlier in the call, we're seeing and actually projected about a 10% decline in revenues for a short period of time in terms of performance royalties.
That's wise.
But with us, we get caught holding the bag because there's no personal guarantees, and we're focused on the stream. But it really didn't change. We were always conservative in terms of what we would forecast an income would be, and allow people to advance on. And being private, we don't have the restrictions as much. So it's apples and oranges. It's just two different great solutions and an approach. And one of the questions that I see here is in terms of what are the qualifications for a bank loan versus a royalty advance? I mean, when a publisher comes into you, because that's who we're talking to, what are the first things you ask for? What do you guys look for?
How do you want to talk it?
You actually froze up for just a fraction of
I
a
did,
second.
Alex?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. So
No, it's I'm sure it's my fault.
no. So one of the questions that somebody asks is, what are the qualifications for a bank loan versus a royalty type advance? You know, and so, you know, when someone comes into a traditional banking environment, what are the things that you ask to see? What do you look at?
Yeah. I mean, go ahead, Heather.
No, it's a great question. No, you're the banker. You start.
Okay. So I see a huge difference is that as a banker, we are underwriting both our borrower and our repayment source. And they actually are two different things. And even if your repayment source is just rock solid and unbelievably awesome, we actually are grading every single credit to both individuals and to companies. And so both of these need to be strong. I find there's more flexibility, if you are only writing that repayment source, the song, and is that song going to be able to pay you back, essentially. Whereas with the borrower, sometimes we'll run into snags if the borrower if it's a company that kind of have no profit history, they're kind of too new for that. And so we probably have to wait before we set up a credit facility to that company. Or if they're an individual and they've kind of gotten in a ditch somehow. It could be from taxes, it could be a divorce happened, something happened that got the individual in a ditch. We have a hard time with that borrower, even if they've got some awesome songs that are going to be able to pay us back. And that's mostly just, sometimes our pricing just gets too high because it's considered a higher risk deal and we have to price it a little higher.
Yeah, and that's the main difference. From our perspective, we're not looking at the individual. We don't have to. We're only looking at the royalty source, the income source, and that's what we're grading it on. But that adds risk for us, and so it's kind of a two-sided. I know we're about to wrap up, and I know Mark wanted to add a few comments before we did. Mark, are you with us?
I am indeed. Now, thank you so much, Heather, Andrew, Alex, for a great discussion, very informative. This pandemic has put a lot of pressure and challenges on our industry, certainly at the macro level, but down to the individual songwriter and artist and independent publisher. So thank you for providing some ideas and strategies that can be considered during all this. For all of you attending, if you'd like to view a recording of this panel, it'll be on our AIMP website in the members area. So shameless plug, if you're not an AIMP member, we certainly encourage you to join. We have chapters in LA, New York, and Nashville, and of course, all of our online programming is accessible wherever you may live. For info about the AIMP and how to join, please go to our website, aimp.org. And with that said, we look forward to seeing you next Thursday for the finale of our summer educational series. And in the meantime, we want to thank our panel. Thank you. It's a virtual clap. It's a real clap.
Thank you.
We want to thank all of you for attending as well, and take care of yourselves and keep safe. And we'll see you next time. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks, Andrew.
Alex, thank you. Heather, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.